At 2 in the morning on the 7th of February, 1965, mortar shells explode across Camp Holloway airfield near Pleiku, and 8 Americans die in their bunks. Within 14 hours, jet engines roar over the South China Sea as 49 Navy aircraft launch toward North Vietnam. Washington calls it a reprisal, Hanoi calls it escalation, history calls it the moment America crossed the threshold. The attack at Pleiku kills fewer men than a single day at Khe Sanh, yet it triggers a war that costs 58,000 American lives. No vote, no formal declaration, just retaliation masquerading as policy. The myth insists America entered slowly. The truth screams that one night changed everything. The conventional story teaches that America slid into Vietnam gradually through advisors, then support troops, then combat units. Textbooks cite the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in August 1964 as the legal starting gun. Policymakers frame Rolling Thunder, the sustained bombing campaign beginning the 2nd of March, 1965, as the real escalation. Historians point to the Marines landing at Da Nang on the 8th of March, 1965, as the symbolic moment. All of these milestones matter, but none ignited the engine. The myth assumes deliberation, interagency process, cabinet consensus. The myth ignores 14 hours between explosion and sortie. The myth forgets that wars begin not with documents, but with decisions made in rage. By early 1965, Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, MACV, stations 23,000 American advisors and support personnel across South Vietnam. Camp Holloway, a helicopter base 6 kilometers east of Pleiku in the Central Highlands, houses elements of the 52nd Aviation Battalion. The base holds 137 Americans, 10 UH-1 Huey helicopters, and minimal perimeter defenses. On the night of the 6th to 7th of February, Viet Cong sappers from the 409th Battalion infiltrate the wire undetected. At 2 in the morning, 81mm mortar rounds impact tents, aircraft revetments, and the operations bunker. The barrage lasts 15 minutes and fires approximately 80 rounds. 8 Americans die. 126 suffer wounds. 10 aircraft sustain damage. 5 burn completely. MACV headquarters in Saigon receives flash traffic at 2:30 in the morning. General William C. Westmoreland, Commander USMACV, wakes National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy, who is visiting Saigon that very night. Bundy tours the wreckage at dawn and cables the White House at 7 in the morning. President Lyndon B. Johnson convenes the National Security Council at 1945 hours Washington time, 7:45 in the morning Indochina time on the 7th of February. The meeting lasts 75 minutes. Johnson approves Operation Flaming Dart 1, a single-wave retaliatory strike against North Vietnamese Army barracks at Đồng Hới, 65 kilometers north of the demilitarized zone. Admiral Ulysses S. Grant Sharp, Commander-in-Chief Pacific, Saink Pak, issues the execute order at 10:30 in the morning Indochina time. Aircraft carriers, USS Coral Sea, USS Hancock, and USS Ranger position 120 kilometers off the coast. At 1400 hours on the 8th of February, 49 Navy A-4 Skyhawks and F-8 Crusaders strike Đồng Hới. Pilots report destroying barracks, fuel stores, and coastal gun emplacements. The U.S. loses 1 A-4. The pilot ejects and becomes a prisoner of war. 4 days later, on the 11th of February, Viet Cong sappers attack a U.S. enlisted billet in Quy Nhon, killing 23 Americans. Johnson authorizes Flaming Dart 2, 21 sorties against military facilities near Chan Hoa. On the 13th of February, MACV requests sustained air operations against the North. On the 2nd of March, Rolling Thunder begins with 104 sorties, continuous bombing that lasts 3 years. By the 8th of March, 3,500 Marines wade ashore at Da Nang to defend the airbase. By year's end, 184,000 U.S. troops occupy South Vietnam. None of this traces back to Tonkin Gulf or a congressional vote. It traces back to 14 hours, jet engines, and a president who chose retaliation over restraint. Not gradual drift, but a single ignition. Camp Holloway sits on a plateau 800 meters above sea level in Gia Lai Province. The base perimeter measures 1,200 meters east to west. Engineers excavate revetments for helicopters but leave the living quarters exposed. On the evening of the 6th of February, intelligence reports note increased radio traffic near Pleiku, but analysts classify it as routine. Regional forces and popular forces, RFPF patrols, detect nothing. At 2 in the morning on the 7th of February, the first mortar rounds detonate near the operations tent. Specialist 4, James Cooper, hears the whistle and rolls under his cot. The next round penetrates the tent canvas and kills 2 men in their sleeping bags. Shrapnel punctures fuel bladders. JP-4 ignites. Fire spreads to 3 Hueys parked on the flight line. Sergeant First Class Robert Williams sprints 50 meters to drag a wounded pilot from a burning cockpit. Medics establish a triage point near the motor pool as casualties stream in. Major Charles R. Blakely, an Air Force liaison officer, counts 15 separate impact points within 90 seconds. I knew it was mortars, not rockets, because the crump came before the whistle. Textbook 81 millimeter. The barrage ends at 2:17 in the morning. Viet Cong sappers withdrawn to the jungle 400 meters west. Search teams find mortar base plates abandoned in the tree line at dawn. MACV intelligence later identifies the attackers as elements of the 409th Viet Cong Battalion, reinforced by NVA advisors. At 2:30 in the morning, the Camp Holloway commander radios MACV headquarters. 8 U.S. KIA, 126 WIA, 10 aircraft damaged, 5 total loss. Westmoreland immediately informs Ambassador Maxwell Taylor and McGeorge Bundy. Bundy and Deputy Ambassador U. Alexis Johnson helicopter to Pleiku at first light. They walk the flight line and photograph twisted rotor blades and scorched tents. Bundy drafts a cable to Washington at 7 in the morning, titling it The Situation in Vietnam. The prospects in Vietnam are grim. The energy and persistence of the Viet Cong are astonishing. Bundy recommends a policy of sustained reprisal against North Vietnam. The cable reaches the White House Situation Room at 19:30 hours, Washington time on the 7th of February. 7:30 in the morning, Indochina time on the 8th of February. Johnson reads it during breakfast. He convenes the National Security Council at 7:45 Washington time, 19:45 hours Indochina time. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara presents 3 options: evacuate, continue advisors only, or retaliate. Johnson interrupts. We have kept our gun over the mantel and our shells in the cupboard for a long time now, and what was the result? They are killing our men while they sleep in the night. The meeting approves Flaming Dart 1 at 2100 hours, Washington time, 1100 hours, Indochina time on the 8th of February. Sharp receives the execute order and relays targeting data to Task Force 77 at Yankee Station. Weather over the South China Sea shows scattered clouds at 3,000 feet. Coral Sea, Hancock, and Ranger steam into launch positions. Deck crews arm A-4 Skyhawks with 500-pound Mk-82 bombs and 20mm cannon rounds. F-8 Crusaders carry Zuni rockets for flak suppression. At 1400 hours on the 8th of February, the first wave catapults off Coral Sea. Jet engines howl over the South China Sea as 49 aircraft form up in attack cells. They cross the DMZ at 1442 hours and strike Zhonghoi at 1450 hours. Pilots report secondary explosions and fires spreading across the barracks compound. Anti-aircraft fire downs one A-4. Lieutenant Junior Grade Everett Alvarez ejects and is captured. The strike ends at 15:10 hours. Not a gradual slide into war, but 8 bodies and 14 hours of fury. Pleiku didn't invite debate. It demanded blood. Lyndon Johnson inherits Vietnam from John F. Kennedy with 16,000 advisors and a crumbling government in Saigon. By February 1965, South Vietnam suffers its 6th coup in 18 months. General Nguyen Khan controls the military. Civilian authority barely exists. Johnson fears losing Southeast Asia to communism, but he also fears losing the 1964 election to Barry Goldwater. He wins that election in November with 61% of the vote, promising not to send American boys to fight an Asian war. 3 months later, Pleiku forces his hand. On the morning of the 7th of February, Johnson wakes to Bundy's cable and convenes the NSC at 7:45 Washington time. Secretary of State Dean Rusk opens with a map of Pleiku and casualty figures: 8 dead, 126 wounded. McNamara presents the Flaming Dart target folder. Đồng Hới barracks, estimated 300 NVA personnel, 17 structures. CIA Director John McCone warns that retaliation might provoke escalation. Undersecretary of State George Ball argues that bombing will not stabilize Saigon's government. Johnson listens for 20 minutes, then speaks. "I've had enough of this. They're killing our boys while they sleep. I can't ask American mothers to accept that." Johnson orders Flaming Dart 1 with one caveat: strike only military targets, avoid civilian areas. He also orders evacuation of American dependents from Saigon. 180 women and children leave on the 8th of February. Press Secretary George Reedy briefs reporters at 11:30 Washington time on the 7th of February. The President has ordered retaliatory action against North Vietnamese targets. This is not an expansion of our role. Reedy refuses to call it escalation. Privately, Johnson tells McNamara, "We're not going in to win, we're going in to keep from losing." The distinction vanishes in the smoke over Đồng Hới. Flaming Dart 1 strikes on the 8th of February at 14:50 hours Indochina time. News reaches Washington at 3:50 in the morning, 15:50 hours Indochina time. Johnson addresses the nation at 1900 hours Washington time on the 7th of February, 7 in the morning Indochina time on the 8th of February. The speech lasts 4 minutes. He explains Pleiku, describes Flaming Dart, and promises measured response. He does not mention the word war. 3 days later, on the 10th of February, Viet Cong sappers strike the Quy Non enlisted billet with satchel charges and small arms. 23 Americans die, 21 suffer wounds. Johnson approves Flaming Dart 2 within 6 hours. On the 11th of February, 21 Navy and Air Force sorties hit Chan Hoa Barracks, 160 kilometers north of the DMZ. Pilots report 80 structures destroyed and 500 NVA casualties. The New York Times runs the headline, "U.S. strikes North Vietnam again after new attack." Public opinion polls show 67% approval for retaliation. Privately, Johnson's advisors realize that Flaming Dart sets a precedent. Attack Americans, expect airstrikes. Viet Cong leadership in Hanoi interprets the same precedent differently. Escalation invites escalation. On the 13th of February, MACV Commander Westmoreland cables Singspak with a request for sustained air operations. Reprisals provide temporary psychological lift but no strategic effect. Recommend continuous pressure. Johnson approves Rolling Thunder on the 2nd of March, 1965. The first Rolling Thunder missions launch on the 2nd of March with 104 sorties against ammunition depots near Som Bang. By mid-March, 200 U.S. aircraft operate from bases in South Vietnam and carriers offshore. Not containment through patience, but commitment through retaliation. Johnson didn't choose war. Pleiku chose it for him. Đồng Hới sits 65 kilometers north of the DMZ in Quang Binh province. The barracks complex covers 12 hectares and houses NVA regiments rotating through infiltration training. Intelligence estimates 300 to 400 troops present on the 8th of February. SINCPAC planners select Đồng Hới because it lies within range of carrier aircraft and poses minimal risk to civilians. Targeting folders specify 17 buildings, 4 ammunition bunkers, and 3 coastal artillery positions. Admiral Sharp issues the execute order at 10:30 in the morning, Indochina time, on the 8th of February. Task Force 77 operates from Yankee Station, 120 kilometers off the coast in the South China Sea. Coral Sea launches 16 A-4 Skyhawks. Hancock launches 12 F-8 Crusaders. Ranger launches 21 aircraft in 2 waves. Weather reports show 3,000-foot ceilings with scattered rain showers. Strike leader, Commander Robert Shoemaker, briefs pilots at 1200 hours. Hit the barracks, avoid the town, and keep radio chatter to a minimum. The first wave departs at 1330 hours. Jet engines roar as 49 aircraft climb to 15,000 feet and head west. They cross the DMZ at 1442 hours and descend to attack altitude at 5,000 feet. Forward Air Controllers, FACs, operating from Da Nang relay updated weather. Visibility 5 kilometers, winds 10 knots from the northeast. At 1450 hours, lead Skyhawks roll into 45-degree dives. Each aircraft carries 4 500-pound Mk-82 bombs fused for airburst. The first bombs impact the eastern barracks at 1451 hours. Explosions ripple across the compound as successive flights release ordnance. Crusaders strafe coastal gun positions with 20mm cannon and Zuni rockets. NVA gunners fire 37mm and 57mm anti-aircraft rounds. Tracers arc across the sky, shrapnel peppers aircraft canopies. Lieutenant Junior Grade Everett Alvarez pulls out of his dive and feels the stick shudder, a hit to the hydraulics. He nurses the damaged A-4 east toward the coast. At 1458 hours, the engine flames out over Hon Mat Island. Alvarez ejects at 1,200 feet and parachutes into the surf. NVA patrol boats retrieve him within 20 minutes. He becomes the first U.S. Navy pilot captured in North Vietnam. The remaining aircraft egress at low altitude and return to the carriers by 1530 hours. Deck crews count 48 recovered aircraft, 16 with battle damage, 1 missing. Post-strike reconnaissance flown at 1700 hours captures photos of the barracks. 14 structures destroyed, 3 ammunition bunkers burning. SINCPAC estimates 100 NVA killed and 200 wounded. North Vietnamese sources later claim 50 dead and minimal military impact. At 1900 hours Indochina time on the 8th of February, Hanoi radio broadcasts a communiqué condemning American imperialist aggression. The communiqué promises retaliation but does not specify targets. In Saigon, ARVN Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Nguyen Van Thieu briefs reporters at 2000 hours. This demonstrates that America will defend its forces. The Việt Cộng must understand there are consequences. Thieu's optimism does not last. 3 days later, Quy Nhon burns. Public opinion in the United States shifts from cautious support to active approval. Newsweek publishes photos of burning Hueys at Pleiku, alongside images of smoke over Đồng Hới. The headline reads, "America Strikes Back." Not deterrence through restraint, but deterrence through fire. Đồng Hới proved that retaliation works, until it doesn't. Flaming Dart 1 and 2 destroy buildings and kill soldiers, but they do not stop infiltration. NVA regiments continue moving south along the Ho Chi Minh Trail throughout February. MACV intelligence detects 7 NVA battalions crossing the DMZ in the 2 weeks after Đồng Hới. On the 24th of February, Việt Cộng sappers attacked the American compound at Pan Rang, wounding 12. Johnson refuses a third flaming dart strike. Instead, on the 13th of February, he approves a working paper titled Sustained Reprisal Against North Vietnam. The document argues that episodic strikes lack strategic impact and recommends continuous bombing. National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy writes, "A policy of sustained reprisal is more economic, more credible, and more controllable." Rolling Thunder, the sustained bombing campaign, receives approval on the 2nd of March, 1965. The first missions launch on the 2nd of March with 104 sorties against ammunition depots at Som Bang, 50 kilometers north of the DMZ. Planners divide North Vietnam into geographic zones called route packages. USAF controls route packages 1 through 4. USN controls 5 and 6. Strike tempo increases from 300 sorties per week in March to 900 per week by June. Targets include bridges, rail yards, petroleum storage, and power plants. By the 8th of March, the airfields at Đà Nẵng and Bien Hoa require ground security. On the 8th of March, 1965, 3,500 Marines from the 9th Marine Expeditionary Brigade wade ashore at Đà Nẵng. Cameras capture them landing at Red Beach 2 with M14 rifles and full packs. Vietnamese women greet them with flower garlands. Brigadier General Frederick Koch tells reporters, "We're here to defend the airbase. That's all." The mission creeps within weeks. By April, Marines patrol 15 kilometers beyond the perimeter. By May, they engage Viet Cong in their first firefight near An Ho. Westmoreland requests additional combat units in June. On the 28th of July, Johnson approves deployment of the 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, and the 101st Airborne Division. By December 1965, 184,000 U.S. troops occupy South Vietnam. The number climbs to 385,000 by December 1966 and 485,000 by December 1967. Rolling Thunder flies 304,000 sorties between March 1965 and November 1968. Air crews drop 643,000 tons of ordnance, more than the entire Pacific Theater in World War II. The campaign costs 922 aircraft lost and 818 aircrew killed or captured. North Vietnam's transportation network degrades but never collapses. NVA forces continue infiltrating at rates exceeding 5,000 per month by 1966. The Rand Corporation publishes a study in 1967 concluding that bombing has not significantly reduced North Vietnam's ability to support operations in the South. Defense Secretary McNamara reads the report and privately concedes to Johnson that Rolling Thunder fails to achieve strategic objective. Johnson refuses to halt the campaign, fearing it will embolden Hanoi. On the 31st of March, 1968, Johnson announces a partial bombing halt and declines to seek re-election. Rolling Thunder officially ends on the 1st of November, 1968. Casualty statistics for 1965 alone show 1,369 U.S. killed in action and 6,114 wounded. ARVN forces lose 11,000 killed and 23,000 wounded. NVA and Viet Cong casualties exceed 35,000 killed. None of these numbers traces back to deliberation or congressional debate. They trace back to 8 Americans dead at Pleiku and 49 sorties over Đồng Hới. Wars expand not through strategy, but through momentum. Flaming Dart ignited Rolling Thunder. Rolling Thunder demanded ground forces. Ground forces required escalation. Not a staircase of decisions, but a single leap off a cliff. Pleiku didn't start a war. It made stopping one impossible. Pause here and ask, what if Johnson had done nothing after Pleiku? What if he absorbed 8 deaths, issued a diplomatic protest, and resumed advisory operations? History offers no clean answers, only counterfactuals. But the choice Johnson made, retaliation within 14 hours, set a precedent that escalation answers provocation. And once that precedent exists, every subsequent attack demands the same response. The perception break happens not in the Oval Office, but in newsrooms, living rooms, and foreign capitals. Before Pleiku, Vietnam registers as a footnote. Advisors in the jungle, coups in Saigon, a war Americans observe from a distance. After Flaming Dart, Vietnam becomes an American war. The shift occurs in 48 hours. On the 7th of February, Americans learned that 8 soldiers died in a mortar attack. On the 8th of February, they watched carrier aircraft bomb North Vietnam on the evening news. Walter Cronkite opens the CBS Evening News at 18:30 hours Eastern Time on the 7th of February with footage from Pleiku. The camera pans across scorched tents and twisted rotor blades. Cronkite narrates, "Tonight, Americans at home must confront a war they've long ignored." NBC runs an interview with an unnamed pilot from USS Coral Sea. The pilot describes the Đồng Hới strike. "We hit the target, took fire, and got out. It's just another mission." But it isn't just another mission. Newspaper headlines shift from diplomatic optimism to martial resolve. The New York Times, Johnson orders reprisal strike. The Washington Post, U.S. bombs North Vietnam after Pleiku attack. The Chicago Tribune, America hits back. Editorial boards split along predictable lines. The New York Times urges restraint. Reprisal is understandable, but escalation is dangerous. The Wall Street Journal supports retaliation. The president had no choice. American lives demand American action. Public opinion polls conducted the 10th through 12th of February show 67% approval for the strikes. Only 18% oppose, 15% remain undecided. But approval does not mean understanding. Americans grasp retaliation. Someone hit us, we hit back. They do not grasp commitment. Flaming Dart implies a one-time response. Rolling Thunder implies permanence. The shift from episodic to sustained bombing erases the distinction between retaliation and war. Johnson's advisors understand this. On the 17th of February, Undersecretary of State George Ball circulates a memo titled "A Compromise Solution in South Vietnam." Ball argues that sustained bombing will require ground troops to defend air bases. Ground troops will require logistical support. Logistical support will require infrastructure. Infrastructure will require defense. Defense will require more troops. Ball predicts 300,000 U.S. forces within 18 months. His prediction undershoots by 85,000. Johnson ignores the memo. By March, the perception break extends beyond Washington. In Moscow, Premier Alexei Kosygin condemns Flaming Dart and pledges increased military aid to Hanoi. Soviet SA-2 surface to air. Missiles arrive in North Vietnam in April. In Beijing, Chairman Mao Zedong warns that Chinese forces will intervene if U.S. troops cross the 17th parallel. The threat constrains Rolling Thunder targeting. No strikes within 30 miles of the Chinese border. In Hanoi, Politburo members debate whether Flaming Dart signals American resolve or American desperation. General Vo Nguyen Giap argues that bombing will harden North Vietnamese morale. He proves correct. PAVN infiltration rates increased from 3,500 per month in January 1965 to 5,500 per month by June. In Saigon, ARVN commanders interpret Flaming Dart as American commitment. They request more advisors, more equipment, more airstrikes. Westmoreland complies. By April, U.S. advisors accompany ARVN battalions on offensive operations. By May, advisors engage in firefights alongside ARVN forces. The line between advising and fighting vanishes. On the 8th of March, 1965, Marines land at Đà Nẵng. Their mission, defend the airbase. Their orders, do not initiate contact, fire only if fired upon. By June, those orders change. Westmoreland authorizes offensive patrols, search and destroy missions that chase Viet Cong into the countryside. The first major engagement occurs on the 15th of August, 1965, near Chu Lai. Marines from the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines clash with Viet Cong forces for 6 hours. 51 Viet Cong die, 3 Marines fall. The Battle of Chu Lai confirms what Flaming Dart began. America fights this war. Television coverage amplifies the perception break. Networks send correspondents to Saigon. Camera crews embed with infantry units. Americans watch Marines patrol rice paddies on the evening news. They watch helicopters land under fire. They watch medics treat wounded soldiers. Vietnam transitions from a foreign policy problem to a lived reality in American homes. Anti-war protests emerge by late 1965. Students at the University of Michigan organize a teach-in on the 24th of March. 35 faculty members lecture for 12 hours on the history and morality of the war. 3,000 students attend. Similar teach-ins spread to Berkeley, Harvard, and Columbia by May. Johnson dismisses the protests as noise, but they grow louder each month. The perception break cuts both ways. Hawks demand victory. Doves demand withdrawal. Johnson occupies the shrinking middle ground, insisting that limited war can achieve limited objectives. But Flaming Dart and Rolling Thunder eliminate the possibility of limited war. Bombing North Vietnam invites retaliation against American air bases. Defending air bases requires ground troops. Ground troops engage the enemy. Engagement demands escalation. Escalation demands justification. Justification demands victory. Victory demands commitment. Commitment demands sacrifice. Sacrifice demands meaning, and meaning in war comes only through winning or ending. Flaming Dart promised neither. It promised only that America would fight. Not because Congress voted, not because the public demanded it, but because 8 men died and a president chose retaliation over restraint. The perception break is complete by summer 1965. Before Pleiku, Vietnam is a crisis. After Flaming Dart, it is a war. The jet engines over the South China Sea carry more than bombs. They carry the weight of commitment, the logic of escalation, and the inevitability of tragedy. By December 1965, 184,000 U.S. troops occupy South Vietnam. The number doubles every 12 months until peaking at 543,000 in April 1969. Rolling Thunder drops 643,000 tons of ordnance by November 1968, achieving tactical destruction but strategic failure. NVA infiltration continues unabated. The Ho Chi Minh Trail expands into a multi-lane highway. American casualties climb. 1,369 killed in 1965, 6,350 in 1966, 11,363 in 1967. The war Johnson promised to limit becomes the war that consumes his presidency. On the 31st of March, 1968, Johnson announces a partial bombing halt and withdraws from the 1968 election. Richard Nixon inherits the war and prolongs it for 5 more years. The Paris Peace Accords, signed in January 1973, end American combat operations but not the fighting. Saigon falls to PAVAN forces on the 30th of April, 1975. Final tally, 58,220 Americans dead, 304,000 wounded, 2 million Vietnamese civilians dead, 1.1 million NVA and Viet Cong killed. The cost exceeds $168 billion, equivalent to $1 trillion in 2025 dollars. None of these numbers stem from Tonkin Gulf or Rolling Thunder alone. They stem from Pleiku and Flaming Dart, the moment retaliation became policy. Historians debate whether Johnson could have avoided escalation. Some argue that withdrawing after Pleiku would have cost him the 1968 election. Others argue that bombing guaranteed defeat by alienating allies and hardening Hanoi. Both views miss the core truth. Wars don't start with strategies. They start with decisions made under pressure. Pleiku applied pressure. Flaming Dart answered it, and once answered, the pressure never stopped. Today, Camp Holloway is a Vietnamese military installation. Đồng Hới is a provincial capital with 120,000 residents. The bomb craters have filled with rain, the barracks rebuilt, the dead buried. But the precedent endures. Retaliation invites escalation, and escalation devours restraint. The jet engines over the South China Sea carried America into Vietnam, and they never truly brought it back. Wars don't start with declarations or debates. They start with mortars in the night and decisions made at dawn. Pleiku killed 8 men. Flaming Dart killed restraint. Johnson believed he chose limited retaliation, but retaliation is never limited. It demands a response, which demands another, which demands escalation. And escalation, once begun, writes its own ending. Wars don't start loudly. They start when engines ignite.